Okay, so let me guess. You are running a real estate team. You are heavy in production. You're making a profit, and you have no idea if it's the right profit or not. I think what we have to figure out is what should your profitability be? People ask me that all the time. I'll go through a P&L review with one of our clients, and then we get to the bottom, and we look at their profit margin, and they say, Andy, is that good? And I love it when I get asked that question, but uh, the answer is always, it depends. And so I think that's what we have to help you figure out. There is a formula you can use to determine if you're healthy profitably. And it all depends on how much of the production you are doing as the team leader and owner. So that's what I want to help you figure out today. All right. So here's an example where the team leader is heavy in production. We're going to identify the income, which is going to be here. There's the total team income. Then we're going to look at the cost of goods sold, which is the amount paid out to the agents and broker. There's that number. Section 3 is the gross profit. Then we're going to see expenses that go all the way down, and we have total expenses there. Then we've got our net income at the bottom. All right, so when we scroll and we pull that data out, here's what it looks like. $460,000 of total revenue, only 9% cost of goods sold, which leaves him with 91% in gross profit. Then we spent 52% on operating expenses, and that left us with 39% net profit and owner pay. So now here's the question. Is that good? On the surface, it looks pretty good. I think there's a lot of us that would look at running a team and have a business and say, yeah, 40% net profit, that's pretty good, pretty healthy, especially outside the real estate and industry. But is it? I'm going to show you how we determine if it actually is healthy or not. And the question that has to be answered is, how much production did the owner do? So let's look. When you set up your P&L in the correct way, we're going to be able to scroll back to the top, and you'll see two sections in this income section. We have owner income and team income. Owner income was 385, team was 75. The owner is doing the majority of the production. In fact, 83% is the percentage that they're doing. $385,000 in change. If we scroll back down, they only made 180. They are $200,000 that they generated from their production lost, eaten up by the business. That's a problem. All of a sudden, this doesn't look so good. If we look at it from a visual perspective, here's the pie, really low cost of goods sold in red, pretty big orange operating expenses. We should address that. And then pretty good size green, but it's still way less than what they did in production. So if we looked at this pie and added in the owner production, let's say it started here, the owner did all of this production and all of this production, because there's 180,000, but they did another 200,000, which probably went up to somewhere right in here. They did all of that. All of this was from their own personal production. If we look at the pie and say how much of it was their personal production, it was all of this. So do you see the issue there? They did all that in production, but they only made the green section in net. That's not good. They lost all of this. The orange and pink overlay section, it's just gone. It's about 200 grand. That's an issue. And so the question is, how much should their profit have been in this scenario? How do they know if it's good or bad? Well, just as a basic rule, I would say you would at least get pretty close to breaking even on your own production. Otherwise, what's the point of a team? But I think the key here is that you begin with the end in mind. If you are going to be building a team, I don't care what style of team, there's all different models out there. None of them are right or wrong, but which one are you building? And are you clear on that? If you're not, it's time to get clear. Think about the different teams that are out there, right? We've got high agent, I would call them like a solo agent team, right? Maybe they have admin. They're mostly doing past client business. They have really low costs. So the key here is low costs. The only cost of goods sold is to their broker. They don't have agents. They're just a high producing solo agent, but they might have some operating expenses, mostly around probably people, because they need to be leveraged with people because they're a high producing agent. The only way they can get to that high production is by being leveraged by people. So if we looked at what their pie would look like, it'd be very low cost of goods sold. It would probably be pretty low operating expenses, mostly people expenses, and the rest would all be profit, right? That's the advantage of being a solo agent. Downside, of course, is not a fun lifestyle. You're not really building anything that doesn't totally rely on you. And you can only grow so big because you can only do so many deals. So that's the downside. But if you're building that, there's nothing wrong with it. But then you need to make sure you understand the model. Another type of team could be, maybe let's call it a shark with feeder fish. That's what I like to call it anyway. This is where we have a top producing agent that decides to get some agents underneath them and just kind of give them the leftovers. Picture a feeder fish on the side of a shark. The shark has to go out and hunt, and whatever they don't want gets left over, and those little feeder fish can grab it. Those are the shark and feeder fish models. In that scenario, the model probably looks something more like this, where we have a little bit more cost of sale, still relatively low, but more than when we were a solo agent because we're now paying agents on some of the deals. We still have about the same operating expenses, and our net profit is still pretty high, but not quite as high as a solo agent. Why? Because my cost of goods sold are higher, and I'm probably having to spend more money because I have some team members that I have to support. Again, nothing wrong with that model, but is that the one you're running? Then we have more of a team. Maybe this is like the school of fish. It's like this big mass of fish. They all are swimming in the same direction. The moment one of them turns, they all turn. They're all swimming together. They're a larger mass in the water because they're all doing it together, but they're all running the same systems, following the same marketing. They're truly a tight-knit group of agents that are called a team. Here's what that model probably looks like. And it depends on if the owner's in production or not, but chances are they have a pretty good cost of goods sold, right? Like the cost of goods sold is probably pretty high, maybe 40%, 45, 50 maybe. And then their expenses are pretty decent too, maybe 20 to 30% operating expenses. And then they're left with that balance. Now it's not a ton, but what the difference between this model, the school of fish, and the shark and solo agent model is that the overall pie is much larger. So even though the net profit piece of pie is much smaller than the solo agent or shark margin, the pie is larger. So the actual piece net profit is larger, maybe not as a percentage, but as a dollar amount it way is. And that leader of that school of fish hopefully is not running as hectic of a life. Maybe they've backed into just listings and then eventually out of production completely. Great. And then finally, I would call this one like a teamerage or even a brokerage. There's not much difference between a brokerage and a teamerage, in my opinion. Maybe there is if you really dig into it, but from a model perspective, there really isn't a huge difference. So in this scenario, the model would look something like really high cost of goods sold. Maybe it's like even 75 to 80% is in cost of goods sold. They have high splits with the agent. But what that means is they only have this to work with. So they're going to spend, let's say 20%, let's call it, on operating expenses. And they're left with somewhere between 5 to 10% in net profit. So it's a really small profit margin compared to the team school of fish, compared to the shark with feeder fish, compared to the solo agent. It's way smaller. I think the advantage here, or the goal here would be is if you have 100 to 200 agents that you have a much bigger pie. So even if it's 10%, if it's 10% of 10 million in top line revenue, that's still $1 million net. So you can make money with this model, but you've got to have a huge operation. Why? Because the majority of the money is going out in cost of goods sold. You still have to spend some, and then you've got a smaller net profit. So that's more that teamerage brokerage model. And there's other nuances of each one of these, but those are generally kind of the different types of models you're going to build when you build a team. The point is, what is your sales business model going to be? That's step one. You got to know which one you're building. Begin with the end in mind. Once you do, this becomes pretty easy. So let's say you were going to build the school of fish model. If you remember, that was this one, kind of average cost of goods sold, average operating expenses, and average net profit, but larger pie than solo agent. Let's say that was the model you were going to run. Here's what you need to determine. What's your net profit goal as a percentage? Well, a lot of times that's hard to figure out. I don't know. What should it be? Well, here's what I would suggest you do. Something you got to look at. And then if you look at a 3-year time period, let's just call it 3 years out. What could you build the business to from a top line revenue perspective? How big could you build this thing? Could you bring in $1 million in total top line revenue? Again, before anybody touched anything, like agents hadn't been paid yet, broker hadn't been paid, expenses haven't been paid. Could you build $1 million? Could you do $1 million? Could you do 5 million? Could you build it to 5 million? What about 10? What about 15? Whatever. What is realistic over the next 3 years for where you're at now and where you want to be or think is possible? Maybe you need to pull market data, look at the top team, if you're not it, in your market, and look at what they carry for market share. If your market has 10,000 sides every year and they do 1,000, they have a 10% market share. So is that doable for you? Maybe it's totally different in your market, right? And when I was building my team in my market, pretty small market in Minnesota, a couple $1 million was about as big as we were going to get, in my opinion, at least in the short-term range when I was looking at this. So let's just say that was the case, $2 million. Let's say you decided that's what you could do. Well, the next question, once you determine that, is how much do you need to make as the owner in net profit and owner pay, like any indirect expenses plus your profit, to make this worth it? And that's with you being 100% out of production. Let's say you said $500,000. So let's say it was 3 years out and you built your business to $2 million in revenue. And if you made $500,000 in net and you didn't sell a single home, would you be happy? Then what we are looking for then is a 25% net profit and owner pay margin. Why? Because 500,000 of 2 million is 25%. So 25%, that's the size of the piece of pie we need for us at the end. And maybe that is like 400K in profit and 100K in salary. I don't care how you split it up, but combined, it's 500 grand that the business didn't eat in cost of goods sold and operating expenses. That's what all of this is. That's 75% of the pie. 75% of the pie now is left for us to run the business off of. So we got to figure out how we're going to divide that up. And it's got to be divided up into 2 places: operating expenses and cost of goods sold. So let's say we looked at our expenses and we determined that we can run this business off of about, let's just call it 30% operating expenses. Maybe we decided it was going to be 10% people, 10% lead gen marketing, and 10% overhead. But total, it was going to be 30% of the 2 million. So we'd have 600,000 to spend on operating expenses. We would have had to step back, we would have had 500 grand in net profit and owner pay. That means we have 45% left of the pie that's unaccounted for. And the only thing we need to do with that is plan for our cost of goods sold, the agents and brokers' costs. And so we would have $900,000 to work with there. Why? Because that's 45% of 2 million. So here's our model: out of production, 2 million in top line, 25% net profit and owner pay, 30% in operating expenses, and 45% towards cost of goods sold. We've now determined our model. So green is profit, red is cost of goods sold, orange is operating expenses. Now we have something to work with. We have our baseline, we have our plan, we have our big hairy goal. We have began with the end in mind. The end is out of production, 25% net. So now we can determine what we should have now while we're in production. Here's how you do it. Here's the formula. For every 1% of owner production, we need to multiply that by the goal COGS. That will equal the additional profit. And then we need to take that and add that to our goal profit. That will equal then our current profit goal. Okay, I know that's a lot, but let me show you how this breaks down. Let's do it for this example, okay? First thing we need to do is how much did we do as the owner in total income? So in this case, 83%. They did 385,000 of 460. So find your total income and have your income divided by the total income of the team, and that's going to give you your percentage. So 83%. So if we scroll back down and we fill this out, 83% for every 1% of owner pay, in this case, 83. We're going to multiply that times The next thing is our goal COGS. Let's go back to the goal, the plan, the 3-year plan. 45% was the goal COGS. So we need to take that times 0.45 equals the additional profit we need. So let's just do the math. 83 times 0.45 is 37.35. That's what we need for additional profit. We're going to add that. Again, I'm just dropping down the formula here to the goal profit. Well, what was the goal profit? 25%. If yours is 20, 10, 5, whatever, that's the number you're going to use. In this case, it was 25. So 25 equals 62.35%. For this person, their goal should be to get to 62.35% if they are going to be doing 83% of the production. Okay. Do you see how I got to that? You see how I got to that? The reason we do it this way is because now, if they were to literally take their business as it is and they were at 62, let's say they were at 62% profit, the goal, and tomorrow they decided I'm stepping out of production and all my deals I'm going to pay agents on, it would have already been accounted for and we would be at a 25% net profit. So that's the formula you need to use. So in this case, if this agent said, hey, Andy, I'm currently at a 39% net profit, is that good? I would say no. I would say based on the formula we just used, you need to be at a 62.35% net profit. They need to increase 23.35 to get there. So now the question is, well, where's that come from? Well, it can't come from cost of goods sold because it's only 9%. It comes from operating expenses. He is 23.35% too high on operating expenses. He needs to be at 52 minus 23.35. He should be at, this needs to be at 28.65% operating expenses, or about 30, going back to the kind of the 10-10-10 idea. If we look at his operating expenses, he's at 16% people, 16 lead gen, and 20 overhead. He needs to be at 10, 10, 10. So if I was him, here's the whole action item out of doing this exercise is I need to decrease 6% on people, decrease 6% on lead gen marketing, and decrease 10% on overhead. And if I do that, I'm going to be running the right model to where I can now grow and exit production and still be at 25% net profit. Otherwise, if he doesn't do this, what I think will happen is he'll grow this business. Well, he'll either quit because it's too hard and he's not making any money because he's spending all this money on operating expenses. And he'll say, it's not working. The agents aren't doing the work. This sucks. You know, I'm doing all the work and they're just sitting around. I'm out heavy in production, so I can't hold them accountable. And he'll quit and he'll stop and he'll go back to being a solo agent. Or he will grow it and he'll fight through that messy middle. And he will wake up one day and he'll realize he can't exit production and make any money. In fact, if he exited, he would lose money. And at that point, he's going to have to make a decision, which is, do I decrease my operating expenses? I don't want to do that because my team expects all this stuff. How can I do that? Or he will have to blow up his team, change everybody's splits, or he'll have to do both. Don't go there. That creates such a miserable life. Listen, I've been there. Back in 2010, that's exactly where I was, and that's why I'm so passionate about this stuff. That's a lot. We covered a lot in this little webinar, but I think that should give everyone some idea of, number one, what we do with bookkeeping. Bookkeeping is way more than taxes. Whether you work with us, you've got a bookkeeper, I don't care. You do them yourself, whatever. You've got to start looking at them this way. And the amount of value you can get on them is unbelievable. Secondly, that this is the way you should be doing it, right? Whether you have us do it or not, this is kind of the way you should be looking at it, and really how you can set some goals around profitability that makes sense for you and aren't just like a shot in the dark. So if you need a quote for services from us, or you want to watch more videos on all this stuff, go to our website at simple-numbers.com. Thanks much.